stronger than that. Trouble comes screaming, we always holler back.
That the process will satisfy, because the alternative to adopting Common Core is you have to have higher education, basically in your state, certify your standards as college and career ready. We had that option, by the way. I mean, that was an option that could have been explored, but we didn't go that route with the previous standards, and that's actually part of the reason why the board is saying now, in addition to evaluating Common Core, let's go ahead and evaluate the previous standards. Let's take a look at it, and let's make a determination which one was better.
Well, what other states have chosen that option, and how successful are they in doing that?
I don't know. I know that there are states that are looking at it. There are states that adopted Common Core. They're moving away from it. There are other states that are basically digging in and say we're staying with it. There are probably people in the room who know that information better than I do, and I apologize that I don't.
I do believe, though, there are people who say, well, let's just keep the Indiana standards. They have to go through the process for us to achieve the waiver. The other thing people say is, well, let's just keep the ISTEP test too. It's been good. We can reuse test questions. Why are we running out of questions? We can reuse them, or if they were good enough before, they should be good enough now. Again, if they're not deemed college and career ready, then we are at risk of losing the waiver. And if we would do that, there are penalties. The federal government can impose some penalties even on our assessment if our assessment isn't deemed college.
Are you satisfied that if the standards that you come up with at the state level are legitimate, and that they do meet the standards, and that they are at least equal to or above the national standards? Are you convinced, forgive me for being skeptical, but are you convinced that people at the federal level are going to be fair and equitable when they do that assessment with you?
I am, especially because of the way that we've laid the process out. And I think one of the things that they've done a good job in terms of they being the board staff and the department staff is keeping our higher ed commission informed of what's going on. I mean, it'd be awful hard to say to the higher ed commission of your state, we know better than you do about what constitutes college readiness. So I think they're doing everything they can to make sure that everybody understands the process. And we'll have to wait and see. But I do know those conversations are happening. I'm not hearing any pushback. The only pushback I hear keeps being a reference back to the waiver, which basically says you either adopt a Common Core or you have your higher ed folks sign off that the standards are college and career ready. One other thought on that I do want to share, and then I'll go to Dr. Moore for a second. There have been a number of teachers who have said, well, you talk about the financial investment, but we've made a financial investment locally. We've spent a ton of money getting geared up for Common Core. And I just want to share this to everybody in the room. Here's the thing. If you accept that the statements are intended to get kids ready for college or get them ready for a career, there are only so many ways that you can express without bias what kids need to know and do. So I would just say this to you. If you've been working towards the assumption of college and career readiness, some things may not work. But I don't think this is a situation that when you're done, you're going to say, well, we just wasted the last 4 years. I don't see that happening. Now, I want to be careful about that because we've had two groups of people. We've got a group of people saying, don't worry about it. They're just rebranding the standards. Well, I hope that didn't sound like rebranding because that was a lot of work. I mean, there are some people who are giving up a lot of time to go through an exhaustive effort to give us some results. I don't think it's going to result in rebranding. I do think it's fair to say that when we're done, there may be some standards that make it through to the other side that were included in the original set of standards that were part of Common Core. I think that's a reasonable assumption. That doesn't mean the whole thing's bad. Similarly, I hear people on the anti-side say, well, all you're doing is putting lipstick on it. You're not really being, doing your job. Well, I don't think that's fair either, because here's the reality. We are going through an exhaustive process, and the key thing that I think has come to the forefront in this debate that I appreciate is when you start seeing the bias that gets into the standards, when you start seeing people introduce and going beyond statements of what students should know and do, and things are out of whack, they're not in the right grade level, or the taxonomy level is inappropriate. Those are all fair things that I think have a chance of being corrected in the process to really get to a set of standards that are appropriate on those fronts. So that's my 2 cents on that, but that keeps coming up. So
I'm Terrence Moore, and I live up the road in Angola, and I teach at Hillsdale. And that's why Dr. Oliver knows me already, because I've spoken on this a little bit. I'm going to try to make this question brief, but for those out there who are skeptical of the original standards and then this process, you've spoken a lot today about process, but it seems to me that we've known for a long time what the English language is, and therefore how to teach it. And what people are worried about is we've been giving these standards through the Common Core that are unreadable if you don't have an education degree. They're written in EduSpeak. And so we've heard a lot today about this process that we're going to go through, which is going to give us another set of standards, which presumably is going to be written by a lot of other education professors and those type of people, which are going to be written in, the best we can hope for is marginally better EduSpeak, which will not get at the heart of how you actually teach English. And the same thing will be said for math. So what will be the criterion of how we know that we actually have a set of standards that govern the teaching of English in the way that it's always been taught correctly and the way that it always will be taught correctly? How will we know that those standards are what we have and what we don't have?
I think the best I can say to that is this, and I'm going to bring an assumption to the table that I bring that others in the room may not agree with. I don't think the conversation's over when the board adopts the standards. There are a lot of pieces that go into how the standards actually get taught. And to be quite honest with you, what we're trying to do at the board is strip back from that and say, what is it ultimately we want them to know and do? In fact, one of the things I've argued for is as they go through the process, and we spent some time having them talk about this in the orientation, is to make sure that the standards are free of an implied bias, that make sure that they are what we would say developmentally appropriate, that we don't insert a pedagogical approach into the standard. And sometimes that does happen. Sometimes it actually prescribes not just what to teach, it tells them how to teach it. I really want to see them be pedagogically neutral to the extent that they can be. And the reason I say it's an ongoing conversation is that there's a couple different pieces of this. You have the standard itself, you have the creation of the assessment, and if you believe that in high-stakes accountability it might be conceivable that a teacher is going to teach toward the exam, that might influence how they teach it. There's also the fact that we each as individual teachers come to the classroom and we bring a certain philosophy into the classroom. And so I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying from the standpoint where I'm sitting, I'm looking at a process that says, at least at square one, do we have a process that will get us to a clear statement as best we can. But there's no way I would stand in front of a group of people and say, oh listen, once we do this process, they're going to be perfect, there's not going to be any issues. There's always going to be issues. There are so many moving parts in this enterprise called education, it's a constant tension, if you will, that we're working through as we work from the standards to the assessment to even the training of teachers and how they actually teach in the classroom. So I have no guarantees to offer. I have no 100%, you can rest assured this or that. I believe we have a fair process that is an academic exercise, at least from the standpoint of bringing people that we believe have the potential to help the board make an informed decision.
Can I ask just a brief follow-up, Pat? I've been on a radio show twice, so you got to give me the time.
That and $20. Go ahead.
Okay, so what are the chances through this process of getting a standard as the follows, which seems clear to me, that in order to teach students to read and to spell correctly, teachers will employ an explicit program in phonics? All the research says that this is the way students learn how to read and spell. Is there any chance that we'll actually get a standard that is as clear and as directional as that?
Don't say what. Don't take Harry's words. And again, this gets to what you believe about how children learn and how literacy develops. I am one of those that believes that it is a process that starts in early literacy, where you build upon the concept of phonics, phonemic awareness, to an issue of fluency, vocabulary development, comprehension. A lot of what we've learned, frankly, that's come out of the National Reading Panel around scientifically based reading research. I can see that. I can see that in my own children. When they don't learn to read fluently, they don't comprehend because their brain is trying to decode instead of really understanding. To that extent, my expectation as a board member is that there would be statements in the English standards, particularly as it deals with reading, that mirror what we know about best practices around how you fundamentally teach reading and writing. I think that's some of the conversation that's taking place now. I think what has gotten thrown into the mix with the Common Core is this urgency, this perceived urgency that we have to have all this higher order thinking and we better start it sooner rather than later. And I get a little nervous about that, to be quite honest about you. To be honest about it, because when I go into I was just out in one of the elementary schools the other day, and I cannot stand this poster. So if you have this poster, I'll apologize if I offend you. There's a poster outside of the kindergarten classroom that says, college begins in kindergarten. No, it doesn't. Kindergarten begins in kindergarten. And what I mean by that is, I expect these panels, when they're looking at these standards, to think about the student to be served by that standard. I would hope that common sense would govern as much of their decision as their PhD behind their title. And that's why the committees are structured the way they are, and they're not a bunch of academics sitting around the table going, what do you think we should say? Because we do that. I sit around the table like that every day. You need multiple voices in looking at that. And I think at the end of the day, I think the board has an obligation to step back and look at it and look at them vertically over a set of grade levels to say, does it make sense? Is it reasonable based on what we know? And one of the things I'm going to say, and it's going to sound like I'm bragging on the board, but I will say with this particular board, and I've been in front of the state board, Kerry will tell you that. I used to come down here and testify and drive her crazy on the other side of it. We have, out of the 11 members, 8 of them are educators, have been in education, have been in the classroom, have been in administration, have done different things inside of K-12. I think that's hugely in our favor. I've been in front of the state board in previous years where it's mostly folks who don't know what a standard is. You say taxonomy and they think you're talking about paying taxes, and it has nothing to do with paying taxes. My point is this: we've put every procedural safeguard in place to make sure there's plenty of redundancy in here to come back and look at the standards again and again and again. And Terrence, this is about as good of an answer as I can give you at this point. We have a process we're going to go forward. It's not perfect, but I absolutely do believe that if we give it a chance, it gives a chance, all of us a chance, including you, to take a look at it and say, do we believe this makes sense? That this will be the students we need to be.
Do you understand where, because we've come through No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top and all that, do you get to where parents and teachers and administrators and communities are skittish and nervous? And I understand that we're trying to get some level of assurances here, but do you understand when people hear you say it and they're like, yeah, okay, sure?
I absolutely get it. I mean, look, I'm a former classroom teacher, principal, parent, and here's the thing that's driving me crazy. I want to get the pedagogical issue, the whole teaching thing settled in the standard assessment, because can I just fill you in on something? I'm going to make a statement that may get me in trouble. You say a lot of statements get me in trouble. Our issues in K-12 education right now, in my opinion, have little to do with pedagogy and a lot to do with relationship. The issues that are causing teachers to get out of the profession, the issues that are causing problems with student achievement, get to the fundamental heart issue of whether or not we have teachers that are really in right relationship with their students, and in right relationship with their parents, and in right relationship with their administrators. And we're hung up right now in a debate about accountability and A to F and what categorical placement should be and whether we should test all the time or test a quarter of the time. And in the meantime, last time I checked when I was in a classroom, I found this out really early on. If I learned how to build a relationship with a child, I could teach any kid. And right now what I'm hearing from teachers is there's no time to build a relationship because they're on to the next thing like that. So I totally get it. Trust me. I have teachers saying, well, if you get it, why don't you get rid of A to F? Well, you know what? Some things are written in the law, and I don't get the luxury of going down there and saying, just throw it out. It's okay. Tell them Brad said it was all right. I don't get that luxury. I've got to work inside of a system to help build an understanding amongst policymakers of what the real issues are that are causing us to have problems in the field. And they're not all pedagogical, they're relational. But we have got to develop a process that's reasonable, that's broadly understood, and have the conversations. And I'm not opposed to having the conversations, but I do get it. And I hope we never come across as a board of saying, like, we don't get the struggle that teachers are going through or that parents go through. We get it. But you've got to work through that process that you deal with the larger issues, which in my opinion, they are highly relational.
Yes, sir.
Dan Teeley, I want to thank both of you for not only tonight, but the work you've done around the state. I wouldn't want to guess how many emails you've both received. And your process makes sense. It looks good to me when I see the process. But I learned a long time ago that personnel is policy. As in, it matters who's on those panels. And so my question is it true that more than a dozen of the members of those panels have either testified publicly in favor of Common Core or signed a petition in favor of Common Core or otherwise publicly stated that they want Common Core? And do you feel they will be able to take those hats off and neutrally judge standards that they already said they thought were good before this review process began?
I thought I'd try to take a swing at that earlier. I'll take a second swing at it. here's the reality. We did not have an application form that said, hey, we're bringing you in and check the box if you're for Common Core, against Common Core. And I'll be honest with you, I've probably been more nosy than other board members just because I've been leading on it, and I've been asking a lot of questions. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted to see the panels. I wanted to see what's going on. I think there's always going to be somebody who can say, yes, well, you did consider so-and-so over here. That certainly can happen. But I'm weighing that in a totality of a process that's fair, that represents as much as we can possibly account for it. And I'll be honest with you, I did not sit and look at the game film and go, okay, I think that person testified. I think that person, I'm not sure. I didn't do that. There are other people, I'll be honest with you, who know, because they were there for every single minute of every single day of every single meeting, and I'm glad they were. I couldn't do that. I've tried to watch some of the videos. I've gone back and seen some of the videos from Notre Dame. I've read tons of stuff that folks have sent me. I've done everything I can, Dan, to have a knowledge base to try and look at it objectively. The key thing I've tried to do is look at what have they done over their career that qualifies them to sit at that seat. And you may leave here tonight and go, well, I don't know why he didn't ask them how they felt about Common Core, because to be honest with you, my biggest concern was, what do you know about teaching math and what do you know about teaching English? And what do you believe about what students should know and do? We'll know soon enough. And here's the thing, if we're off on that and it goes to public comment, I'm pretty sure there are people in here in the room we're going to hear from. And I can't underscore what Carrie said enough when she said to you, you need to go to the public comment, you need to go to the public hearing, because here's the thing, unless you testify on it, unless there's some written testimony somewhere, the board really doesn't have a right to challenge it. I don't have a right to come up and say, hey, I want to make some changes. Nobody testified against it, but I just want to make some changes. It doesn't work that way. There has to be public comment or public testimony that I can point to and say, there's a whole group of people that says, we don't think that's right, which opens up the opportunity for the board to say, let's revisit that. So that's why those safety pieces are in there.
And we will try to be objective. Are we perfect? Who's to say for us, our objectivity? They have a rubric that they're using to evaluate the standards. I would hope that they do it fairly. Again, we're human. Do I hope it? It's the best the process could be. I really could not tell you who on the panel was or was not for Common Core. And in some ways, I'm hoping they're professional enough that I shouldn't ask that question. Because I'm hoping, again, but that they're going to be objective and do the job that they've been asked to do as fairly as they can do it, the same way we're going to do the job as fairly as we've been asked to do it.
And that was actually expressed by board staff and department staff in the orientation. I mean, that was hit head on. That being said, as somebody mentioned all the emails we get, I can't stop folks from basically going out and saying, oh, they didn't take it serious. Look at who they put on the panel. I heard that person. I'm never going to be able to stop that. It's like trying to take a swing and trying. I can't. It's not humanly possible to control that many pieces. The best we can do is look at it and say, do we have a process we believe in, and do we believe our staff's carrying out with the fidelity that we believe that it should be? And as of right now, yes. But process is only half of it. I'm waiting on the product. When the product comes, we'll get another chance to look at it, and if the product is subpar, then we go back and we take another swing at it. And at that point, there's a lot of other things we can do. That resolution allows us to go to the outside. I mean, one of the things the board could do, and I don't want to throw out all the what-ifs, but that resolution basically says, when we get to that point, if we want to go to the outside and go another route, the board has that authority. We have until July 1st. I hope we don't take that long. But there could be a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, a plan F. We're at plan B right now.
I went to Catholic school, so I was raised in Catholic school. So that Catholic school wanted to use the Bible to teach some text complexity issue. Would the Bible be a suitable document to teach some text?
Well, I'm going to answer that as somebody who teaches school law. It would come back down to how they're using it. If they're using it basically as a form of literature, they have to some extent, some academic freedom in how they use it to teach that standard. So the state doesn't take a position anymore on what we're adopting material-wise. We take a position on what kids need to know and do. Locally, your school board might have something to say about that. And they might say that you have to stay inside of a box that they've defined locally. But the state board basically has really, over the years, if you've watched what's happened, they've decentralized more and more of the textbook adoption process.
Right. So my read on that is correct. I've looked at all the standards, and if I wanted to use, because the standard is there, it's very gray. The kid reads a story, says what the main subject is.
Absolutely.
The Bible would be suitable for that.
So just like, we talk about, we want state sovereignty, or federal in many ways, we'd like local sovereignty over state. I
So
want.
it's already there.
So.
You just
so-
told me it's already
right.
there.
And so if your local school board adopts different
Correct.
texts, then
Right.
we're not wanting to write into the standards
The last issue gets
what
to
you use.
to what the gentleman from Hillsdale said. Your answer was in there. As far as the reading is, there's going to be. He didn't give you the answer, but your answer was in the slides. And so far as that, the new thing is just going to be a melding. It's not going to be a rebranding. It's going to be a melding. He said it explicitly. He's going to take the old Common Core with the old standards, or the current Common Core with the old standards, assign a plus, minus, or zero to each of those things, and align them.
No, there's not.
So there's not room for your thing. It won't be in it.
It's not so much an alignment as much
It's
as
a melding. It's a melding.
Well, the problem with using the word melding is that it assumes that they don't have any other options, and that's not true. I mean, part of the deliberation, the reconciliation phase, is to say, out of those two standard sets, do we have something that satisfies what we believe needs to happen at that grade level? If those committees don't find it there, they have absolutely every right to go out and look at something else or create something locally. So,
I've seen both of those. There's no way that those both melded don't cover 99.9. There's not room for something like 47. Would you agree?
I don't understand how you're at.
So what you
I'm
wanted
not
was
sure.
something for the phonics, right? You'd like to incorporate the phonics in there. But if you take what they're trying to teach, they're going to take the melding of the old and the Common Core, they're going to meld those together, assign that plus minus zero thing that he showed you. Okay? And he's going to find that it certainly satisfies the reading requirement that would come from your phonics. They're going to find it. My point is they're going to find it.
I think I'm following you now. Yeah,
not
and
in what you want.
I think it's reasonable.
It's in there. They're going to find it.
Yeah, I
All
think
right,
it's.
all right, let him answer, thank you.
Yeah, I think I get where you're heading with that, and I would just say this to you. There's no question that I think a high percentage of the standard statements from one of the two sets at some point are going to address that. But here's the thing that we have to keep in mind, too. There's nothing that prevents those evaluation panels from making recommendations in that draft college and career ready standard. For example, you can have something in there right now that talks to phonics, okay? There obviously there is. If you know the 2008 English Language Arts, and there listed there is. In Common Core, there's some things related to that as well. However, what the panel's also doing isn't just simply saying, well, we like that one, we kind of like that one. They have absolutely every right to look at that and say, is this thing free of a bias? Is it clear? A quick example, we had a standard in the Common Core that said something like, students will use multiple strategies to do X, Y, Z. Well, that's not clear. I mean, if I'm teaching up in Gary and you're teaching down in Sellersburg and we're both reading multiple strategies, what does that mean? So that's the kind of thing that in the orientation they covered. So I get what you're saying in terms of, in terms of the content and what kids need to know and do. Is it reasonable that a high percentage of those things are already in one of those two sets? Sure. But until they go through the actual process, I don't know to what extent they're going to need to revise or amend a standard to make sure it gets to the point which we want, which is we're telling them we want it free of bias, we want it developmentally appropriate, we want it pedagogically neutral, and we want it clear what we want kids to know and do.
We had said 30 minutes, we've gone 40, so I'm going to ask this gentleman and this lady who are in line will be our last questioners for the evening. So if you would, your question, please, sir.
All right. And concerning rigor in college career readiness, in Appendix B of Common Core, there's a list of examples of levels of complexity in English text. Renaissance Learning, which is a company out of Wisconsin, puts out Accelerated Reader. This program tells the readability levels of text. They did a study on the list in Appendix B of Common Core for high school and showed that their average reading level was 6th to 7th grade. So when we define rigor, I would like to know how can we improve that rigor? So then I went to the actual website for Accelerated Reader to see this myself. And the 4 books listed from grade 9 to 10, we have Fahrenheit 451, we have The Gettysburg Address, The Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale, and Walden by Henry David Thoreau. These reading levels are 5.2, 4.3, 5.6, and 8.7. So when you go through those, it's 5th grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and then 8th grade. At the bottom of this, it says the broad readability range at higher grades reflects the very text to which students should be exposed, including those with low readability, yet higher level content and themes. Most reading material is written at a level below a 6th grade level. This is for the high school list that is on the Common Core Appendix B. And if that is true, which, assuming that this is a valid company, which has been in the years past, what can we do to improve that rigor, since we're trying to get college or career readiness?
All right. it's interesting you bring this up because we're working on a strategic plan for the state board right now. We're having this conversation about as we adopt assessments. I don't know if those of you are familiar with the term Alexile score, or you know what Alexile is. But basically, Alexile is a way of kind of benchmarking the readability level using a numeric range to where a student is in terms of their grade level progression. And one of the things I hope will happen is this, and I'm going to tie a piece of reading research in that I like by Ron Honig on this. And I really believe this is an elementary principle. I saw this. I think the way that you increase rigor is that you have to first have some way to quantify where they're at. And there's a couple ways we can get at that. A state assessment could help generate something like a Lexile score. And the reason that's important is that the way that you grow them, the way you do it is that you can't just jump them from here to here. The idea is you've got to keep finding reading material to put in front of them that's slightly above what we call their zone of proximal development. To use a jargon term, sorry about that, Pat. But you've got to push them a little bit further than what their current Lexile is. And so I would hope that we're moving towards a time in education in Indiana where instead we use a one-size-fits-all. As Carrie referenced, the board is having a conversation around growth inside of the assessments. You hear Superintendent Ritz talk about that. She's not the only one talking about that. There are board members who have long believed we needed to have more growth in that 8F model. But we are also having conversations in terms of a strategic plan of how do we make sure that we're putting tools in there that are going to help us do exactly what you're talking about, rather than just saying, well, here's the list and we're going to benchmark it here. Now, that's going to happen, and I was stunned. She showed me the Lexile scores for most of the high school reading texts, and they were basically at 5th, 6th, 7th grade level. That's a problem. But here's the thing: as we decentralize and we give more local autonomy to what they're going to use, that even gets harder to control for that. So I think the better plan is to say, how do we provide measures of where students are at, and then what are you able to do locally in the classroom and at a district level to make sure that you're pushing kids slightly beyond that and they're constantly increasing.
And that goes back to when I talked about, whatever assessment we pick, let's pick an assessment that assesses reading along the way, because right now we say, 91% of Huntington's third graders can read. I teach 6th grade, and 90% of my kids aren't reading at grade level. And so I need a measurement of where they're at so that then I can pick texts that are appropriate for them to keep pushing them along. And so that becomes then part of that big assessment piece.
So at what point does that lower the standard though that you need to be? I mean, at some point you need to get to college to where you need a job. Well, you can't get certain jobs in engineering or in other histories or many fields where if you don't read at a high reading level.
Yeah, well, I agree, but I think my point on Lexile is we were looking at this about a week or two ago, is I think the range was like 1185 to 1385 for grades 11 through high school, and yet the materials are like 400 or 500 Lexile points below that. And I think that as you work through the standards, you start getting into the assessment, you start getting into what you're putting in front of in terms of instructional materials, you can really have a better conversation. But Carrie's right, the current assessments we give, when you hear Superintendent Ritz say we don't get any reading data back, there's none. I mean, we're basically walking out and saying, hey, 90% of third graders are grade level. Really? I mean, do we really know that? Or are we simply saying it because they passed 90% and passed the test? So I'd love to unpack it more. I'll hang around and talk to you more about it. That's kind of the conversation we're having right now, is that how do we start to infuse growth in that assessment, and do you have a metric by which you can track it?
And that's not...
Hunkered in the sand, middle of nowhere. The war was raging and he didn't think he'd be spared. He told his buddy, guess this is the end. His buddy looked at him, said, don't say that.